Hello guys and welcome to this new series where I will talk about the history of the Italian Republic from the end of World War II to today. I will do this by going through a list of all the Italian presidents. For those of you who do not know me, hi, I am Ipernick the Great and I make videos about Italian history and politics. The series will start from De Nicola and go all the way to Napolitano, though I won't be saying much about the events after 2010 since there aren't many academic sources on the topic. Before today, I never really talked about the President of Italy. We usually just talk about prime ministers, normal ministers, mayors, or members of parliament. Presidents are usually not too invested in the political shenanigans. Article 87 of the Italian Constitution states that the President of the Republic is the head of the state and represents national unity, so is sort of the embodiment of the nation, if you will, a figure that exists to maintain the balance of power between the parliament, the prime minister, and the judicial branch. For this reason, we see the president very rarely outside institutional broadcasts or in a more casual lighting. The president plays a crucial role in the appointment of government officials and the passing of new laws. For example, he holds the power to call off the parliament in certain situations and call for referendums. Being the highest political position in the country, he is also in charge of the army, often meets with other foreign leaders, and can grant honorary charges. His power is mostly executive, but he has leverage also in the Italian judicial branch. He can pardon people, and he is part of the High Council of the Judiciary, which controls the ordinary judiciary of the country. You may think that the president is a very powerful figure, and you would be right, but there are limits to what he can do. Italy is a parliamentary republic, therefore, unlike the US or France, our president has less power than our parliament, which not only can elect the president of the republic, but also has the power to disapprove whatever he does. For example, the president can suggest a new prime minister, but if the parliament applies a motion of no confidence, it's a no-go. While if the parliament passes a law that the president doesn't like, he can't refuse to sign it twice in a row because the constitution would forbid him to do so. In short, the president of the republic is a monarch, but without religious attributions and less power. Today we're talking about Enrico De Nicola, Neapolitan lawyer, liberal gentleman, and first president of Italy. Enrico De Nicola was born in 1877 in Naples. He lived a peaceful childhood in a middle-class family. Whenever De Nicola got good grades at school, his father would take him to the Neapolitan theaters to enjoy local comedies and shows for kids and young adults alike. De Nicola would grow as a kind, well-mannered young man who became a criminal lawyer in 1896 after graduating from the University of Naples in law. He became famous nationwide, especially in Naples, for his honesty and kindness. In fact, it was not uncommon for De Nicola to offer his services for free to his poorer clients. In 1907, he was elected into Naples City Council as a liberal. More specifically, he was a follower of Giovanni Giolitti, who was Prime Minister of Italy for many years at the start of the 20th century. In 1909, he was elected as a member of the Chamber of Deputies, where he was very respected. So much that he was re-elected in the following three legislations. He was also the Undersecretary for the Ministry of Colonies from 1913 to 1914 under Giolitti, and Undersecretary at the Ministry of Treasure in 1919 during Vittorio Emanuele Orlando's government. Orlando might be someone you are more familiar with. He was the guy that cried in front of George Clemenceau, Woodrow Wilson, and Lloyd George in Versailles because they refused to give the Eastern Peninsula to Italy. Pretty pathetic, I know. Thankfully, some Lenin-looking ass managed to take it back for us, but I'm getting ahead of myself. In 1921, he was re-elected into parliament, but not as a member, but as the president of the chamber. Basically, what the president of the Chamber of Deputies does is to maintain order in the room, like he makes a to-do list, tells people when it's their turn to speak, and calls off the people that interrupt or do anything that can slow down the session. This role may seem worthless lawless, but it was among the highest charges of government at the time. Togliatti himself even asked De Nicola to be prime minister twice, but he refused. Some say because of his humility, but many think he just didn't want to give up his nice seat in parliament, which he was so proud of. In many regards, though, De Nicola was not a risk-taker, and prime ministers are exposed to a lot of conflicts, so he was more than happy to stay where he was. Things seem to have been going great for Enrico De Nicola until we remember what happened in Italy in the early 1920s. Yeah, exactly. De Nicola remained president of the Chamber of Deputies up until 1926, when the parliament was abolished and a new chamber full of fascists was placed instead. De Nicola was president at the time when Giacomo Matteotti was shamelessly assassinated by Mussolini's grunts, and he was harshly criticized after the war for his silence during those scandalous times. Keep in mind that the elections of 1924 were most likely rigged, and so the parliament was already fascist for the most part, so if De Nicola did try something to stop it, he would have been killed as well. He must have seen it, and therefore I do not blame him for making that decision. De Nicola was pro-monarchy, but he did not like fascism. In fact, when he was elected into the Council of the Fascists, he kindly declined to take the oath, hence making his candidacy invalid and was removed. De Nicola would take a break from politics during fascist times. Even when King Emmanuel III nominated him senator, he barely ever attended the meetings, instead preferring to dedicate himself to his law profession. Now let's go forward to 1943. Italy is going through a lot right now. Mussolini is losing support, both among the people and the parliament. The moment the latter goes against him, the king decides to arrest him and put General Pietro Badoglio in its place. Now, Badoglio is a bit of a controversial figure. On one hand, it is thanks to him that Redditors can make very original jokes about Italy changing sides in the Second World War. On the other hand, he was also accused of crimes against humanity in Libya and especially Ethiopia. So yeah, cool dude. Also, he technically didn't make Italy change sides, he just made Italy give up earlier by making him sign an armistice with the Allies. All the fighting after September 1943 was more like a civil war that wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for Germany invading Italy, but anyway. Badoglio's government was, as you may expect, very unpopular at the time. The only people that wanted Badoglio in charge were the king and the English, but the other parties, or at least what was left of them, did not want Badoglio. Not only that, but they wanted the king gone, so they could make a republic. By this point, the anti-fascist parties had made the National Liberation Committee, also known as the CLN, which stands for its Italian translation, Comitato di Liberazione Nazionale. This committee was made out of all sorts of people: liberals, communists, socialists, social liberals, Christian Democrats, and social democrats, all united under one common goal: hating fascism. After the armistice was signed on the 3rd of September and publicly announced by Badoglio on public radio just 5 days later, the king and his son and heir Umberto II left Rome for Brindisi in Apulia, something that nearly everyone disliked. Not only that, but Badoglio failed to give orders to Italian troops that were still fighting around Europe. This led to many lives being lost when it could have been all avoided. In February 1944, most of southern Italy had been reconquered by the Allies. This then allowed the king to move a bit further north to stay somewhat closer to the action. On the 15th of February, the king moved in Ravello, a town around 60 kilometers away from Naples, a city whose majority voted liberal and was keen to the king. It was also where De Nicola operated as a lawyer. De Nicola was distantly following the whole drama, and he decided to take his little car and travel all the way to Ravello to talk to the king. De Nicola, even though he was somewhat sympathetic to the idea of a king, he also wanted to find a way to make the CLN happy, so in his visit he proposed this compromise to the king. He would convince the king to do as he says, using his knowledge of the Albertine Statute and his convincing lawyer's religious rhetoric. For the ones who don't know, the Albertine Statute was essentially the flexible constitution of the Kingdom of Italy. Once at the royal palace, De Nicola would point out that according to the Albertine Statute, the king has to abdicate the moment a war was lost. However, contrary to what the CLN states, the monarchy can still be intact, and all he has to do is to appoint his son Umberto II as lieutenant to the king. Victor Emmanuel III was not convinced at first, but after 4 hours of arguing, the king eventually accepted to take responsibility of what happened to his nation and agreed to do what De Nicola proposed after Rome was freed from the Germans. Meanwhile, Palmiro Togliatti, the leader of the Communist Party, made another great step. In April 1944, he decided to stop his protest against Badoglio and accepted to cooperate. Due to Togliatti's influence in the committee, all the other parties followed. This led to the creation of Badoglio's second cabinet, with different ministers that would represent all the other parties. In June 1944, Rome was freed, and as promised, Umberto II succeeded to the throne. There he decreed that once the war would end, Italians, through a voting system of universal suffrage, would vote for a constituent assembly that would be in charge of writing the new constitution. In 1946, shortly after the end of the war and before the actual election, King Victor Emmanuel would give up his power entirely to Umberto II, who would then make another decree where he would allow people also to vote between the type of government they prefer, monarchy or republic. In June 2nd, 1946, Italians went to the polls to vote for the constituent and the new form of government. With a turnout of 89%, the Republic won by 56%. Though, as things usually go in Italy, there is always a north and south divide. Yeah, don't get me started on that. The monarchists accused the Republicans of mingling with the votes, and for about 2 weeks Italy was in a mess. On one hand, people were annoyed by the monarchists for stalling and slowing down the writing of the constitution, and on the other hand, the allies were still waiting for a stable government in Italy so that they could get their war compensations and sign the peace treaty. On the night of the 12th of June, the Council of Ministers gives a momentary power to act to Alcide De Gasperi, head of Democrazia Cristiana, the party with the most votes. King Umberto II did not like this very much, but accepted to nominate De Gasperi his lieutenant until the results became official. Though tensions seemed very high, it was then that Umberto II, probably to avoid another civil war, decided to go in exile in Portugal, where he would spend the rest of his days. Sadly, Umberto II would never come back to see Italy ever again. So anyway, let's get back to the President of the Republic. Seeing the clear divide between North and South and the need to appease the monarchists, the Constituent and the Council of Ministers started to look for candidates for president that were originally from the South and were liked by the king's supporters. Pietro Nenni, president of the Socialist Party, proposed Benedetto Croce, famous and celebrated idealist philosopher, but he turned down the offer pretty fast since he knew that the Catholics wouldn't want an actively non-religious president. Next, we had Orlando, the crybaby, who also turned down the offer, thankfully. Finally, Togliatti suggested Enrico De Nicola, since he was the one person that set this whole process of democracy in motion. Everybody was very thrilled by that idea. It was De Nicola's somewhat centrist stance and on the more delicate matters in Italy, such as monarchism and religion, that won him the favor of the vast majority of the parliament. It would be Giuseppe Saragat, president of the constituency, to ask him, to which De Nicola at first said no, unless all the other candidates said no as well, and if everybody was okay with it, which was the case ironically enough, and De Nicola probably knew it. So in July 1946, De Nicola arrived in Rome as the first president of the Republic. De Nicola then wrote a speech to be read at the assembly by its president, where he acknowledged his role as the ensurer of the Italian national unity. It would turn out a particularly hard task. De Nicola was the first president of a parliamentary republic with no constitution. This was completely new territory. Nobody was even sure what a president was even supposed to do, so De Nicola kinda had to make his own rules and laws as he went. One of the first things he did when he got to Rome was to receive visits from many former high-ranking politicians such as Orlando, Saragat and Sforza in order to get advice from them in regard to the new government he was supposed to form. He also asked the advice of De Gasperi, the man that would turn out being one of the most influential people of the early republic. De Nicola will eventually put De Gasperi in charge of the first cabinet of the Republic of Italy, and he will stay at the head of the Council of Ministers for many years after that. The relationship between De Gasperi and De Nicola was complicated. They were very different as people, not to mention the fact that De Gasperi liked to do things his own way. One of the first disagreements they had was when De Gasperi wanted to put a certain Guido Connella at the Ministry of Education. Connella was far from incompetent, but he was also a Christian Democrat. That wouldn't be a problem in most other cases, except that De Nicola wanted to keep public education as distant from religion as possible, and he feared that by appointing someone like Connella at the ministry would result in the exact opposite. But De Gasperi didn't care and appointed him there anyways. This was objectively a petty issue, but still, De Nicola's mission was simple, keeping national and party unity, but De Gasperi aimed to undermine the socialists and communists, whom he didn't trust, and therefore did his best to appoint his men wherever it was needed. In 1947, De Gasperi also went to the US to meet Truman, without telling the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Pietro Nenni, the head of the Socialist Party, which understandably pissed them off to the point of resignation. At the same time, the Socialist Party was having a lot of inner fights, which led to them giving up support for De Gasperi's second government, and therefore forcing De Gasperi to resign under De Nicola's recommendation and to form a new government. In De Gasperi's visit to the US, Italy made an informal alliance with Truman, where if the Italian Communist Party attempted a coup against the Christian Democrats, the Americans would intervene. De Gasperi also managed to get some more loans and bread from the states, as recommended by De Nicola. In May 1947, though, there was a more crucial governmental crisis in regard to party alliances. De Gasperi wanted to backstab Togliatti's communists and to form a government without them, with the support of the United States. This went against De Nicola's institutional role of protecting national unity and party alliances, and so he threatened to resign, though everyone knew it was a bluff, so he stuck around. A new government had to be formed, though, and De Nicola first asked Orlando and then Nitti, who said no, because of course, and so Nicola was forced once again to make a new government under De Gasperi. In July 1947, De Gasperi really wanted to get the reparation treaty out of the way with the Allies, so he came up with an awful one that would have destroyed the already crumbling Italian economy, a peace treaty without conditions. Of course, he did not want to damage the economy for the sake of it. He hoped that by making a deal as soon as possible, he could then get more loans and bonuses from the United States. De Nicola, though, didn't like this treaty at all and refused to sign it in September 1947. Mario Scelba, the Minister of the Interior at the time, also hated the treaty and resigned in protest. De Nicola used Scelba's resignation as an excuse not to sign it, because treaties like these need the approval of the entire cabinet, so De Gasperi met Scelba and forced them to take back his resignation. Even though Scelba was back in the cabinet, De Nicola still refused to sign the unconditional surrender, reason for it being that, according to the Albertine Statute, he was not the head of state, so he would have to wait for the new constitution to arrive to sign it. It would be Mario Toscano, an expert of diplomatic history, to change his mind by pointing out that yes, according to the statute, De Nicola was not the head of state, and that since the king was not around, De Gasperi would technically be the head of state, and that De Nicola's signature would be purely cosmetic. De Nicola did not take this kindly at first. He reportedly tossed papers around in frustration. He then called off the meeting just to finally signed the peace treaty some hours later. Looking at episodes such as these really show that De Nicola's powers had their limits, though his indirect contribution to the constitution are nothing to scoff at. He is responsible for most of what is written about the President of the Republic in the Italian constitution, and even the parts he did not think of did come from the Albertine Statute, the document he was faithful to throughout his time in office. So when the constitution was passed on the 1st of January 1948 and the first parliamentary elections took place, the transition period ended, and with that also De Nicola's era, according to De Gasperi. De Nicola wouldn't have minded staying for another period. He still had the support of the left, but De Gasperi made it clear that he wouldn't have supported his re-election, and so, seeing that most of his duties were fulfilled, De Nicola dropped out of the race and allowed someone else to take his place. In May 1948, at the final scrutiny for the President of the Republic, the left mostly voted for Orlando, to my amazement, but to win the majority would be Luigi Einaudi, whom we will talk about in the next episode. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe, like and comment down below. If you really want to help me, there will be a PayPal link in the description for you to click on and maybe donate me whatever. This has been Ipernick the Great, and I will see you next time.